From CitrusTV News, this is a special report.
Good afternoon. Take a look. Our CitrusTV cameras rolling a little while ago as President Biden landed at Hancock Airport. The president is expected to speak at Onondaga Community College in a few moments. This is a CitrusTV News special report. I'm Ericka Love.
And I'm Benjamin Schiller. Welcome to those watching on Twitter and the Orange Television Network. This is the first visit the SU Law School graduate is making to Syracuse since becoming president. Biden is expected to tout the $100 billion Micron semiconductor plant expected to be built here in Clay. It's definitely a historic and significant day for anyone that lives in Onondaga County, as the Micron plant, which was announced last month, will be heading just 5 miles north of campus to Clay, New York.
Yes, and this is over $100 billion semiconductor plant here up in upstate New York. They're pledging to give over $250 million back into the community. It's just a very big deal today for upstate New York.
Right, and let's go to CitrusTV's John Perik now. He joins us from the SRC Arena, an event center where the president is expected to make his remarks. John?
When can we expect the president to begin speaking, John?
Well, guys, we are learning from the White House right now that the president is expected to speak here inside of the auditorium on the Onondaga Community College's campus at 3:30. That is, it's just after 3:20, so it's in a matter of minutes. And just take a look around me. The place is packed. There is a certain energy right now inside of this SRV arena. And as you can see, there is a big sign back there. It says, "A future made in America." And that's what this investment is about, according to the people that have already spoken here. We heard from Syracuse University Chancellor Ken Severud. He gave some remarks. We also heard from Onondaga County Executive Ryan McMahon. McMahon says that this event, it's not just transformative for the county, it's transformative for the entire country. McMahon says, and I quote, "This is the greatest investment in the history of our country in Onondaga County." I also spoke with him and I asked him, what can we expect? He said that we should be hearing from the president for about 15 to 20 minutes at 3:30. And again, we are here live on Onondaga's Community College. We have already learned that the president is on the campus. And again, we are expecting to hear from him any minute now, and we will have that live here on CitrusTV News' special report of President Biden's visit to Syracuse, guys.
John Perik, thank you so much. And we'll have that coverage of President Biden's speech in just a few moments on our stream. But going back to the whole Micron plan, this is a significant moment for this community, especially for low-income households on the other side of I-81.
Yeah, it's crazy that they're coming here. This is a big deal for the community. McMahon said that, he wants factories to come back. This is a perfect place. We have to believe in our community. You're going to be sponsoring over 40,000 jobs in central New York. This is coming after the Chips and Science Act that was recently passed this summer, big on Chuck Schumer that he passed into this.
And speaking of Chuck Schumer and Governor Kathy Hochul and Syracuse Mayor Ben Walsh, they greeted the president at the airport. President Biden landed at 1:59 p.m., got off the tarmac around 2:09 p.m., and he was greeted by Hochul, Walsh, Schumer, and a large delegation of local legislators. But going back to the Chips and Science Act, this was a bill that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer pushed for. He was looking forward for a whole year, trying to get support on both sides of the aisle. Finally got across the finish line this past summer. And
it's over $52 million. It's an incentive for business owners to, bring back factories and big plants like this back to the United States. Most electronics are built and done over in Asia. The U.S. does lead in computer chip design, but it's not that big of a deal, especially here in upstate. And it's such a big deal because, this could have happened in France. This could have happened in Asia. New York State is getting a $6 billion incentive from this. And there's spending that's going towards STEM projects, the community, and so many things here in the Syracuse area. Right.
This $280 bill has a large impact in not just here in the Syracuse area, but around the entire nation. President Biden, since he got into office in January of last year, he has pushed for advancing middle-class, low-income neighborhoods to kind of get a big, large operation going. He got that here in Syracuse, New York. In Clay, New York, for example, with the Micron Act, we talked about this before, 40,000 jobs will be added to the area of a county that has just 300,000 people. So there will be a large large amount of people moving to the Syracuse area just to work for Micron.
Yeah, and it's crazy to me because I really appreciate the big expanse that Micron is putting out to the community. We're seeing them reach out to the YMCA, to spiritual leaders. They're supporting faculty here at Syracuse University. They're going to be hoping to use some of the funds produced from the plant to encourage diverse research. That's been their biggest push in Idaho, where the organization is based from. They've also invested so much in their education system, and that's what they are putting forward, in Clay and in Syracuse. They want to push forward education, research, and a diverse opinion about what technology and engineering is supposed to look like in the community. They're also hoping to hire over 1,500 military veterans to work within the area and work with the local YMCAs to provide childcare for families and mothers who possibly may be working at the plants.
Right, and Syracuse is historically one of the poorest cities in the United States of America. And having a large operation like Micron in the Onondaga County community expands that jobs. On top of the 40,000 jobs like we just talked about, there'll be opportunities for 9,000 direct jobs. That meaning once the construction begins, they're looking for 9,000 people to begin operations here. Let's kind of dive deeper into what this means from an educational standpoint. We know that part of this deal will be $10 million given to local educational institutions because there's going to be a lot more students moving to Onondaga County because their parents are going to get jobs at these factories.
And like even in Clay, 9,000 jobs. That's 9,000 families that are helping and plenty of children who will benefit from this. But you've been watching our live CitrusTV news coverage. We're going to take a look in a few minutes as President Biden eventually, joins at the podium here at Onondaga Community College. And as we're continuing this conversation on, it's a big deal for President Biden to be back in the area. He went to school here for for law school. But his house is here. Some of his family members are still here. I think that the community is excited to now have the now president back in the community. He's been walking around talking to people. I just think that Micron itself is feeling the support of upstate New York, that is what they were counting on when they got here and when this bill passed during the summertime. Absolutely.
You walk around the Syracuse Hancock Airport even, you see signs about Micron. You see the community is pushing all in on the Micron advancement. But let's talk about Biden's ties to the Syracuse area. We've just mentioned he was a 1969 law student graduate of the university. Biden's first real home was here in Syracuse, New York, and this is the first time since he's taken office as president of the United States visiting the Syracuse community once again.
And I think he's been voting and he's been very vocal about how important the Syracuse area is to upstate New York, but also just his experience in general. He came in law school, didn't really know what he was doing, and now he's made this transition from senator to now vice president to then president. He's been able to connect back and forth. Like you said, it's his first time back, and he's excited to communicate and connect back with the community that he's so familiar with.
Right, and as vice president, we saw Biden several times here on the campus of Syracuse University and around the community. But let's talk about the other connection involved with the New York State government and Biden's visit. It's Governor Kathy Hochul. She's an graduate of Syracuse University. And one thing you have to note is that President Biden has yet to endorse Kathy Hochul. That race for the New York gubernatorial election is just 2 weeks from now.
Yes, and Governor Kathy Hochul, she's been pulling at strings and ties all across the community to be able to get that endorsement. But not just that, she will be getting the endorsement of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and because of that, she's just going to be pulling and pulling because it's so close between her and Lee Zeldin.
Right, and we are just minutes away from Biden taking the stage at Onondaga Community College. Let's talk about what we're expecting out of his speech later this afternoon. One big point that we're seeing at CNN and Syracuse.com reporting that Biden is expected to kind of not talk about his achievements in office, but talk about how the Republicans will plan to inflate costs for consumers in America.
Yeah, and I think the difficult thing is, as inflation has now gone down in New York State, Micron is coming into the picture, and this is what I think he's going to be emphasizing. This is how we help our communities. It starts from the top and it boils down into these small groups of people where, inflation is going down in New York State, and this is what can happen across the country. So he's trying to, I think that he's going to try to prove a point. This is what it looks like. This is work in action. This is what I said on the campaign trail, and this is how it plays out.
And specifically, he's going to try to move away from the point of that if the United States is in a recession, because quite frankly, we do not know if he is in a recession just yet. But some of the points we might see him talk about is how mortgage rates would increase if Republicans take office. He's expected to take some shots at Republicans in his speech today.
Yes, and Governor Hochul has really been trying to talk more about that. But we're going to see President Biden kind of coming up soon. This is definitely going to be an ongoing issue with inflation. But another big issue that Hochul is going to be focusing on is crime, abortion, these issues that a lot of Republican candidates do not want to talk about across the country, that President Biden is encouraging voters to push their candidates to continue to talk about.
Right, and Ericka, I got to stop you there. You've been watching our live Citrus TV news coverage of President Biden visiting Syracuse area to talk about Micron. We'll have that speech for you in just a few moments.
And, as we're waiting for him to come up on the stage, you know how President Biden is. He's probably walking around talking to everyone in the space. But I do think that in terms of the specific upstate New York portion, we have the 22nd Congressional District. But Governor Hochul has been, walking around, talking to people. But with President Biden here, it does raise up the stakes. She does hopefully get the endorsement of him. But she's really close in polls to Lee Zeldin, and he's really going to keep pushing and pushing to the very end. He's a local. He grew up near Clay. He knows exactly what this is going to do for the community, and he has been vocal about how this is going to help the community. But Hochul's really going to need to push how this was a part of her plan with Chuck Schumer, how she's worked with President Biden, and bring it all together to show that the Democratic Party in upstate New York is at one front together.
Right, and Hochul sort of was thrown into the fire when she became the governor of New York just last August of 2021. And you just have to wonder, President Biden always likes to talk about how he's a Syracuse graduate. And you just have to wonder if that speech today, you'll see an endorsement from Kathy Hochul. Well, we're just a few minutes away from that speech. But another thing I want to point out is that, as we just mentioned a few seconds ago, President Biden arrived at Onondaga Community College just about 40 minutes ago to meet with the Micron representatives. You have to wonder, what are they talking about in this meeting?
Yeah, and I don't know. I think the biggest thing is going to be what the next steps will be. Obviously, we don't know what's going to come of this gubernatorial race, but we do hope that President Biden is giving the backing and the support and even just the advice from a presidential standpoint to Kathy Hochul on what that should look like. And in her last days in office, as we're continuing to move into next year, what steps she can take to continue to boost. Her biggest thing was redistricting and how that can help, on a national level with the congressional seats and the state Senate seats here in upstate New York, but in New York State as a whole. But I think that President Biden is going to continue to usher in this message that it takes state legislation to push these goals forward. It doesn't matter what the issue is. He is counting on these governors, state senates to push through these bills that will impact the state as a whole, especially with gun legislation and with abortion and the biggest issues that are plaguing our country right now.
Right, and you just have to wonder, Biden is all about small town America and helping a community out, helping community boost their economy, just like the Micron deal is doing in Syracuse, New York. If President Biden decides to run again in 2024, you have to wonder if this Micron event will be used to kind of shift towards, hey, I got this done for the small community here in Onondaga County in upstate New York. You have to wonder if Biden will push for the Micron deal to be part of his 2024 campaign as well.
I definitely think it will. His big deal was Build Back Better, and this is the ground hitting the road. Literally, he's going and he's showing, okay, this is what my plan was during my campaign. This is how I worked with legislator, a bipartisan deal to get this to happen. And this is what it looks like in fruition. And as we move closer and closer to that election, you're going to see President Biden speak more and more, like you said, about little town America, but not just here in upstate New York, but as we move into the Midwest and we move down all the way to the southern states, this is what it can look like. These large companies coming in, but boosting up the economy quickly.
Right, you just have to wonder. President Biden, during his 15-minute speech, it's going to be talking about how Republicans are kind of just shifting towards boosting a crisis. But for example, in the food stores, we're seeing the price of eggs, we're seeing the price of bread. Everything seems to be going up. You go to the gas pump. The gas prices are finally coming down here in Syracuse, but gas prices are coming up. You have to wonder, will President Biden address inflation during his speech?
I think it's going to be an interesting pushback because he can address inflation as much as possible, but it's really hard to put A and B together because, you have inflation going up and down every single week. A couple weeks ago, it was going down because we were getting money out of the reserve, and now, we're going to take it back to John Perik here. Can you give us some developments on that, John?
Well, we are still here waiting for President Biden to start speaking. We just learned that there will be a 2-minute warning, which will be announced here in the SRC arena, and that will happen, of course, 2 minutes before he's going to speak. So we will be able to relay somewhat or some information once we hear that warning. Now, again, just to reiterate what we've already seen here in the SRC arena, we heard from Onondaga County Executive Ryan McMahon, multiple representatives of Micron. We also heard from Syracuse University's Chancellor Ken Severode and the president of the Onondaga Community College, where this event is being held. Now, again, there's a certain anticipation in this air here inside of the SRC arena as the clock is really kind of winding down now. We know President Biden is here on campus. Multiple videos are circulating throughout social media of him or of his motorcade arriving, and we would assume that he has to be somewhere right now in the building. We can't fully report that yet, but we do know that the stage over here on my left, it's already being prepared for President Biden to come. They had the presidential seal. It was wrapped. They have taken that seal off. So again, we are just trying to get as much information as we can right now. But we do know, as the White House told us earlier, that he's expected to speak at 3:30, and we are now at least 5 minutes past 3:30. So really, any minute we should be getting the 2-minute warning, and then President Biden will give his remarks on the new microchip facility heading to Clay. Guys?
No.
John Perik, thank you so much. Thank you for that update. And we will make sure you guys know when exactly President Biden will be taking the stage. We know that that'll be in just a few moments from now. But Ericka, going back to our conversation about how Biden will use the 2024 campaign if he runs, how he will talk about the Micron deal. We're going to see some of his bullet points today for 2024 because we know Election Day is just, 12 days from now? Mm-hmm. We are so close from Election Day here in America. Make sure, by the way, you're watching the Citrus TV. The election special will air live on Citrus TV News and OTN at 10 p.m. on November 8th. The election special will air live. We have all the full coverage talking about the Lee Zeldin, Kathy Hochul gubernatorial race, as well as the local races here in New York 22.
Yeah, I think that as he gets up to the mic, he's going to try to find a balance between celebrating, this Micron deal and then slowly try to transition into what this means for the country. Like we said, he will talk about those small towns and how this will boost the economy. And, we keep hearing this rhetoric that Democrats aren't worried about the economy, that they're only worried about taxes. But the reality is that this is a Democratic president putting his money where his mouth is. He's showing exactly what it is like to be in a high office, but work your way down and learn to work with local governments and local communities and find a way to help those in the small communities get exactly what they want. Like we said, Micron is hoping to put in a lot of money into education and provide a lot of resources to small businesses in the area and those smaller families, single parent homes who need that extra support in their home. And I think that's what President Biden's going to talk about.
Right, we're definitely going to see President Biden talk about the Micron Act in just a few moments from now. But I should also note that it was reported yesterday among the delegation of congressional leaders and just legislators from New York State in general to greet President Biden today would be Governor Kathy Hochul, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, New York Senator Kristen Gillibrand, as well as Congressman John Katko. John Katko is the Republican in the group meeting with President Biden. We know that Congressman John Katko is the outgoing congressional member here in New York 22. That race will be featuring Francis Knoll, the Democrat, and Brandon Williams for the redistricted New York 22 campaign. But we just have to talk about how it's not really typical for a Republican to meet a Democratic president on the tarmac or just meet with them in general.
I think this is exactly what President Biden is trying to show. This is what bipartisan support looks like. I'm in Washington, D.C. every single day trying to have these conversations between Congress and Senate. But when it's time for the actual celebration of our efforts, this is what it should look like. This is what we may not have gotten in the last presidential candidate. This is exactly what he's saying. He's different from former President Trump. I know how to meet in the middle. This is what bipartisan support looks like. And regardless of our issues, we're hoping to build up our communities in a strong way. And I think that's why, Katko is there. That's why we have the governor there. We have a big meet in the middle. We might not agree on everything, but this is exactly what we're hoping for. I definitely want to point out, there's one thing that President Biden sometimes talks about, but is actually going to be great for the community with Micron being here. Micron's total carbon footprint footprint is only 7,000, a little bit around 7,000 emissions, and it's really low. And I think that President Biden is going to continue to have that conversation about how this is going to improve the environment, especially with Central New Yorkers. We have these beautiful parks and state parks here that they care about, and this will help the community in a large way that I think he's going to keep boosting about climate change.
Right. When you think about factories, you think of driving on a highway and seeing the smoke in the air, all the pollution it's causing to the sky and just the air quality in the area. And with Micron having the low carbon footprint, that is very good for the environment. We know that Syracuse is historically a very polluted community. There's a lot of birth defects. There's a lot of people with asthma in the community just because of the pollution and the environmental factors that we have here in Syracuse with being such a blue collar community with all these factories. The Micron plant is great for the community because it's not going to cause that much pollution.
Yeah, and they employ over 50,000 people across 17 countries. So think about if it's only at 7,000 right now, and that is across 17 countries, imagine how it's just going to continue to even itself out as we employ more people. And they found a way to balance what that looks like between, having these many plants, hiring these many people, but not actually hurting the environment here.
Right, and the environment is obviously the most important factor. But let's talk about the Syracuse Hancock Airport. We know we saw President Biden just before 2 o'clock, 1:59 to be exact. Air Force One landed at Syracuse Hancock Airport, and he got off the tarmac at 2:09 p.m. Our CitrusTV Jake Morrell was out there earlier today getting the shots and getting the reports on President Biden landing in Syracuse. But let's just talk about how Syracuse Hancock Airport will be impacted with the Micron deal. Because not only are people going to be flying in from just New York City or their main other locations for Micron, people will be flying in from all international locations that come to Syracuse, New York.
Exactly, since they're planning to hire so many people of so many different groups. Of course, like I said, the 1,500 military veterans, we have that number here in upstate, but you're inviting a large group of people who may not elsewhere have job opportunities in their states or their cities, and it's a great opportunity for them to come in and join the conversation. Now we're going to toss back over to John Perik. He's live at the event right now. John, what do you have for us?
Well, guys, we're back here in the SRC Arena. Again, we are still awaiting President Biden to begin his remarks, but we're joined here with Talking Points analyst Teagan Brown and CitrusTV News reporter Nicole Aponte. But I want to begin with you, Teagan. So first off, let's talk about the political ramifications here. Can you just put into words what this microchip investment means to Biden's administration?
This means a lot, especially talking about ending kind of foreign manufacturing of these and bringing it back to the United States. A few weeks ago, we saw at the Micron presser that only 2% of chip manufacturing takes place in the United States. Micron wants to push this to 10%, and that's going to be a really big thing for Biden's administration, bringing things back home domestically.
And we also know that President Biden, we know he's going to talk about the microchip investment, but outside of that, what other topics do you think he might address?
Well, I think one that could pop up is a possible vocal endorsement of Hochul. We saw last week former President Donald Trump endorsed Republican candidate Lee Zeldin. So it's really the question of if he's going to vocalize that today and endorse Hochul, a member of his own party.
And yesterday we were covering the New York 22 congressional district race, obviously with a huge debate going on yesterday on SU's campus. Now, do you think he might potentially endorse Knoll?
I think it could be possible. I think this would be Biden, trying to take away that narrative of people thinking that New York is turning more red, because as we know, New York is a very blue state, so he could possibly endorse Knoll just to kind of enforce that blue of the state here.
But again, as Ryan McMahon told us earlier today, this is more than politics. It has community ramifications. So, Nicole, when it comes to the community, how is this investment going to change Onondaga County?
Well, as we covered before, it's going to change so much. Well, first we learned 50,000 jobs are going to be created because of this Micron chip plant. $50 billion invested over the next 2 decades. But what we found out today is that actually a student at SU, he actually served in the Navy. He is the first student intern to even be considered by Micron. He has been helping out. He's also a youth mentor at a local nonprofit here in Syracuse. So he pretty much does it all. And this is just the start. Also, Ryan McMahon said today that when you tell your kids something that's going to happen in central New York, it actually is going to happen. They're going to grow up with this insane opportunities going into these jobs as well. Also, we heard from Chancellor Ken Severud. He has said that we're going to get more investment into careers that could possibly come out of our university and right directly into this Central New York investment that, people would stay in Syracuse if they were able to do this.
Now, Nicole, you've covered very closely the other side of the story,
Yes.
right? $100 billion investment seems great for President Biden, but then there's the flip side, and it's the residents in Clay who are being affected. So through your coverage, you've spoken with multiple residents.
Yes.
What's their message?
Well, they are from pretty much the entire situation of what's going on is OSIDA gave them money to be moved from their home in Clay, and they're being moved off to somewhere else. So they got a stipend for whatever much their house cost, and that's where the Micron chip manufacturing plant is going. Obviously, their whole lives are in this entire place, but they understand where the government's coming from. They want a betterment for the community. So still, even though their lives are pretty much being flipped around, that's what they tell me, they understand that this is going to be a huge investment for not only Central New York, but for America. I mean, as you said before, that sign back there, Future of America, it's the future of Onondaga County as well. So it's just, even though it's affecting their lives, I think they understand that it's also benefiting the community as well.
Right, and that's what Onondaga County Executive Ryan McMahon, he told us. This is the future of America. It's the future of the county, and no matter what, this will change the county forever. That's a direct quote from Onondaga County Executive Ryan McMahon. But again, when it comes to the president, we are still awaiting for him to begin his remarks. We were told by the White House he would start at 3:30. Well, right now it is just about 3:45, and we are yet to see any movement at the podium behind me. But again, we will have those remarks right here live on our Citrus TV News special report here from the SRC Arena. I'm John Perik for Citrus TV News.
Thank you, John. So, Nicole mentioned that there is a student here at Syracuse University who will be benefiting from this. He's in the Navy. I think, once again, that reiterates our point that we were discussing earlier, that you have this large plant coming into a small community, but then bringing it down, and it trickles down to everybody who's affected. There's students, there's family, there's kids, there's older people, there's veterans. There's so many communities that'll be affected by this. And Micron has talked about how in Idaho, where they're based, that they invested in education, and they've been able to see the ripple effects of how that improves the community.
Right, and this will definitely benefit the Whitman School of Business here at SU, because this is a great opportunity for business leaders or future business leaders to join and write a company here in Onondaga County. We know that Syracuse University is one of the 3 biggest employers in Onondaga County. Micron probably boosts to the top of the rankings in terms of employers and how people they're going to hire down the road, but Micron will have a huge impact, just not only for the community, but also Syracuse University.
Yeah, and on Micron's statement to the public about how excited they are about this, they've mentioned multiple times that they plan on doing trainings for both people who are currently in college and people who are outside of college who choose to want to be invested in both Micron and spinoff businesses. They're hoping that they can provide grants and funding to students who hope to start their own businesses, which is so unlike such a large company like that. You don't want the competition, so it's unlike them to have these grants set aside for students who want to hopefully start their own businesses later down the line. And like we mentioned, educational opportunities, and that's such a big deal up here in Central New York.
Right, and it's going to be a huge factor just for educational standpoints here in Onondaga County. One thing I do want to talk about, how during John's report a few seconds ago, we saw a massive sign in the back. The red sign on his left-hand side said, "Future Made in America." Mm-hmm. That goes towards Biden's small-town approach of bringing American-based companies to small-town communities like Clay, New York.
And I think it's an interesting approach to bipartisan efforts, because, we have seen Republican candidates currently who are running their elections say, we want business back in the United States. We don't want to keep buying electronics from China. We don't want to keep insourcing oil from other places. This is the way that we need to bring our small communities together. And like you said, it's the future of America here. This is a great example of a large company coming into play and then choosing to work with the community and not just for personal benefit.
Right, and we know President Biden will be taking the stage in just a few moments. He will take the stage at 3:30. I understand it's 3:48 right now. President Biden will be taking the stage in just a moment. We'll have that coverage for you on Citrus TV. But just going back to Micron in general, they're going to have a major impact on the community, because not only are they bringing jobs and bringing supportive wages to families who need income here in Syracuse, New York, but they're coming to strengthen a large labor management committee. They're going to support project delivery and enhance workplace safety. And we just talked about a few minutes ago about the $10 million investment in local educational institutions, not only here at Syracuse University, but also charter, private schools, public schools all around the county.
And the reason they made that decision is because they did what most people don't. They talked to community leaders. They went into Liverpool, they talked with spiritual leaders there at churches, at synagogues, and they found that that is what the community wants. They want that educational boost. They went to Lemoyne College. They talked to students there. They even met at Rosamond Gifford Zoo to meet with families and kids there to ask them, what would you like in your community? A playground? Would you prefer a new pool? Something of that nature to provide a large humanitarian effort towards a larger picture.
And there definitely will be a large effort. Let's toss to Chilekasi at Adele. He is at the SRC event arena. Chile, what do you have for us?
Ben and Ericka, one of the things we're talking about, as we're still approaching the speech from President Biden, he's expected to come up shortly. We don't know when exactly, but we've heard that there will be a 2-minute warning, as John Perik alluded to earlier in the broadcast. One of the things that was interesting that some of the leaders of Micron and Chancellor Kent Syverud and County Executive Brian McMahon talked about was the idea of Central New York being back. For a lot of this community, a lot of manufacturing jobs were here in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s and previously. Obviously, we've seen how that's played out with Carrier, ending that naming rights agreement with the Carrier Dome and Syracuse University earlier this year. And you saw the JMA Wireless Dome come up. You see this new innovation of technology fuming its way through the university and through this region.
Please
and actually, we're about to
seats.
get this 2-minute warning, so I'll send it back to you in the studio.
Sounds like President Biden will be taking the stage in just a few moments. Before President Biden takes the stage, let's talk about how it is a packed crowd at the SRC Events Arena. This arena we know holds a few thousand people. We are now just approximately 2 minutes away from President Biden taking the stage. Ericka, this is going to be a big moment for Syracuse.
Yes, of course. Everyone's so excited to have President Biden back. Of course, now as president, not as vice president, not as a student, not as an undergrad. And so this is a very big deal for upstate New York, for central New York in particular. So I really think everyone is very much energized to have him here.
Right, and President Biden will be taking the stage in just a few moments on our telecast. But going back to Micron, I want to know, is going to announce a multi-million-dollar partnership with the National Science Foundation to invest in a growing workforce, because right now the semiconductor industry coincides with the supply chain industry. We saw the Cisco protests here in Syracuse. Factories need supplies. Only you can supply this by trucks, trains, planes, you name it.
Yes, of course. Like I said earlier, U.S. leads in computer chip design, but because of COVID and everything that's happened, so many supply chain shortages have occurred. And now that this is here in our country, it's not the biggest plant in the world, but it is going to help so much with inflation, with prices going down, and helping larger businesses like Dell get computers out there, get those memory chips out there, especially to students in the area who need those quick fixes.
Right, and we know President Biden will be taking the stage in just a few moments. John Perik earlier in the broadcast told us that this speech is expected to take about 15 to 20 minutes long for Biden. It's unclear if he'll bring anyone up on stage, any guests or anything, but it sounds like President Biden will be taking the stage in just a few moments.
And you mentioned that science and technology is such a big deal for Micron, and they also will be investing a lot of money into the Science and Technology Museum in downtown Syracuse and Armory Square, and that is for kids. That's not even for adults. And so once again, that brings back this idea that they're trickling down to these communities, small little things to get people engaged and excited about having things come into fruition. They're excited to have their kids be like, oh, I have this huge, cool factory that I can tour. And I think that's great for a large business like that to be involved in a community.
Right, and President Biden will be talking about the future in a speech. We're seeing the signs in the background of reports from Chile and John. The big signs in the back say future or made in America. He will talk about the future and how not only will Micron have an impact now, but it'll have an impact just 50, 60, 70 years from now here in the Onondaga County community.
And this is a relatively new approach for President Biden. he hasn't really started a big campaign trail for himself, but he has been on other people's campaign trails, and for him to bring up, the future of America, it is a great way to slowly lead into what his goals may be for 2024, whether he decides to run or not. This is a great opportunity for him to start talking about future generations, what he hopes will come of America in the next few years.
And for Biden, we kind of saw a slow beginning of his presidency. He did not get his packages approved immediately, which kind of tanked his numbers in the polls. His approval numbers were in the 30 range, which is very low for a president, especially a first-year president. President Biden, with this CHIPS and Science Act, which he worked with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer for, he'll be definitely touting this CHIPS and Science Act in the Micron deal, which was responsible from the CHIPS and Science Act. But we know that President Biden will be taking the stage in just a few moments. President Biden will be taking the stage on our telecast, and Ericka and I will pick it up on the other side of the speech.
Please welcome to the stage Shawnee Davis, accompanied by Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Governor Kathy Hochul, Senator Kristen Gillibrand, and Sanjay Mehrotra.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you. It is such an honor to be here. I can't believe this, but here I am. My name is Shawnee Davis, and I am a proud member. And I am a proud member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 43 here in Syracuse, New York. I wasn't always a skilled tradeswoman. As a matter of fact, I attended Syracuse University, where I studied psychology, which is totally different from what I'm doing now. But I got my start as an electrician, doing an amateur rough-in with my dad in Florida, and I loved it. I enjoyed the experience, and so my dad told me, if you love it so much, when you get back to New York, you join the union. And so that's what I did. Local 43, they welcomed me, and with some borrowed tools from our now business manager, Al Marzullo. I was able to work my way up, starting as a helper, moving up to being an apprentice, and then a journeywoman electrician. And now I am the first black woman master electrician in the region. Thank you. My career as in the IBEW changed my life for the better. It's given me incredible opportunities and a bright future here in Syracuse, New York area. And I'm not only a master electrician, but I also own my own electrical contracting company, Luminary Electrical Contractor. And we are here and we are ready to power up New York's long-awaited manufacturing rebirth, so needed. So you all can only imagine how much of an honor it is to be able to introduce the President of the United States. When I got that call, I was like, who? Anyway, we all know that politicians tend to make a lot of promises, especially during election season, which we have coming up. And too many of them don't actually keep their promises, but not President Biden. One thing I really like about President Biden is that he understands the value of our workers in the United States, and that we've always, as workers, stepped up to help our communities and our country, and that the workers of this country should be respected, and as well as the unions in this country, excuse me. So he made some promises when he got elected, and I remember some of these promises. They're written down on this paper here, so let me go ahead and read those. He promised to reach across the aisle. He promised to invest in rebuilding and modernizing our infrastructure, to expand our broadband, modernize our grid for cleaner energy, and to target underserved communities. President Biden promised to bring back manufacturing so that we can start building things in this country again. Well, here we are 2 years later, and I am saying loud and proud that promises were made and promises were kept. For the people that have lived in this community, myself, my whole life, we understand how desperately we need this new beginning in the Syracuse and Central New York area, especially with all of the plants closing, job losses, and the hearts breaking for generations of workers. So this plant means hope. It means good paying union, construction, and manufacturing jobs for years to come. So selfishly, I'm really excited about this. This plant also means that when I go to see and speak to our high school and middle school students, I can, which is our next generation of workers, I can look at them and say, you can get a job right here in Syracuse. You don't have to go away anymore. You know, that was one of the things that we lost, with a lot of people moving away because we didn't have that. So we have that now, and I'm able to go ahead and say that to them, look them right in the eye and say that to them, and also to show them that a person that looks like them can be a part of rebuilding our city, our state, our country. And call ourselves union members and a CEO. But it's not just about the announcement today for what we're here for Micron, but thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, Central New York is rebuilding just along with the rest of the country. Hundreds of local 43 brothers and sisters are already working on the massive I-81 reconstruction project, thanks to President Biden and Governor Hochul. And Joe Biden has always kept his promises to union workers like myself, and that's why I'm proud to be standing here today. So on behalf of my family, on behalf of my local union, on behalf of this great city of Syracuse, New York, it is my greatest honor to introduce a great champion of American workers that we've ever had in the White House. All right, ever. The 46th President of the United States, President Joe Biden.
Well, thank you very much. Hello, Syracuse. If you have a seat, take it. If you don't, I'd probably leave. Shawnee, thank you for that introduction and for representing your sisters and brothers, the IBW. One of the reasons I'm standing here is because of the IBW, not a joke. They endorsed me early on, and along with, quite frankly, every other union in America, and we came along. I made a promise, and I'm keeping it. I'd be the most pro-union president in American history, and I'm going to make sure that happens. Simple reason for that. You know, the middle class built this country, and unions built the middle class. We used to say in the Senate, excuse the point of personal privilege, though I'd like to introduce some of my family and friends, and I don't know where they are right now, but my, you know, I married a beautiful woman from Skaneateles Lake, was at Syracuse. I met her on spring break and fell head over heels in love with her, and gave up a starting job on the football team in Delaware to come up every weekend because I couldn't stay away from her. And her brother Michael's here. Where's the family? There they are, back there. The Hunter family. The Hunter family is here. Daughter Maureen and Greg, and the children Gillian and Gregory and Nancy Hunter and her daughter Jess, my brother-in-law Johnny's wife and daughter, and as well as one of Bo's best buddies, Andy Grote, and an old friend who's here. I excuse this again, as used to say in the Senate, a point of personal privilege. But just like coming home, man, coming home. Molly and her brother, Jimmy Crean. And the president of Syracuse University and the dean of the law school, who probably I wouldn't get in these days, although I went there on a scholarship. And Mayor Walsh, Ben, thank you, County Executive McMahon. It's a good, you know, it's good to be in a place that means so much to me, and that means so much to our country with the project we're here to celebrate today. Governor Hochul, thank you for the passport into the state. Appreciate it very, very much. You've been a great partner to me and a great leader for the state. You saw an opportunity to attract more semiconductor supply chain businesses, and you signed a law to make New York even more welcoming. We were down in Poughkeepsie not long ago, a little outfit called IBM, spending $20 billion investing in incredible jobs, attracting companies, creating jobs. A century ago, this region was the heartland of manufacturing. And when I was up here as a law student, you had Kodak, Corning, General Electric. The governor's always believed it could be that way again. She thought that would be the case, and the region is poised to lead the world in advanced manufacturing. Not a joke. Poised to lead the world. And I also want to thank my buddy Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader. This guy gets things done. And a close to a hometown girl, a senator from upstate New York, Kristen Gillibrand. She gets things done. I learned a long time ago, when Kristen calls and asks something, just say yes. just do it right away, because you're going to do that anyway. So, good being with you, kid. Now look, it's a hell of a delegation. I think it's one of the best delegations in the country, and Chuck is a great majority leader. Getting big things done. And we wouldn't be here today. It's not hyperbole. We wouldn't be here today without him. And Kristen's, as I said, hometown here in upstate New York. She's a fighter for families in this area. And you'll be hearing from all these folks in a minute. But Congressman John Katko, where's John? Johnny? Stand up. John is a Republican, and I like him a lot. I like him a lot. John, I've been in the Congress for a long time, and we used to have, this is how we used to be. We used to work together like you've worked together with me and with the delegation. Thank you very much. I'm quite frankly a little sorry you're leaving. And thanks for what you've done. And thanks for the passport into your district. I appreciate it. And thanks for reaching across the aisle to support the CHIPS and Science Act, which this guy wrote right here. We'll talk about that in a minute. You know, and we also have one of the leading members of the United States Congress, Chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. He came all the way from California just to see Chuck. Where is he? There he is. Good to see you, Adam. Adam and I talk together a lot. We can't share any secrets to the rest of you, but you know, we can talk. He's the only guy I can talk to. I'm only kidding. Folks, we're here to celebrate one of the most significant investments in American history. Again, not hyperbole. One of the most significant investments in American history. and it's going to ensure that the future is made in America. One of the bright spots around the country that should give us a sense of optimism and hope about who we are as a nation, and it's part of a broader story about an economy we're building and one that works for everyone. The positions America put America in a position to win the economic competition of the 21st century. And again, that's not an exaggeration. It's literally an accurate statement. We're joined today by the CEO of Micron to celebrate their commitment to invest $100 billion over the next 20 years here in America to build factories, to make semiconductors, those small little computer chips that power everything in our everyday lives, from our smartphones to our automobiles to washing machines, hospital equipment, you name it. It's the largest American investment of its kind ever in our history. Thank you very much, boss. They're going to build factories the size of, this is not hyperbole, the size of 40 football fields, big enough to fit the Carrier Dome 4 times inside it and still have space left over. And we're going to, this is amazing. What's that going to happen here? You guys have no idea. It's going to run, and it's going to run entirely on renewable energy. 9,000 jobs, from PhDs and engineers, HVAC technicians, machine operators, with an average salary of $100,000 a year, and tens of thousands more jobs across the supply chain. 20 unions working together to fill jobs for technicians, construction workers, electricians, operating engineers. And by the way, it's the largest investment in American history that's also governed by a project labor agreement. That's a fancy way of saying union. Union, not labor, union. They ensure that the major projects are handled by well-trained, well-prepared contractors, subcontractors, and highly skilled workers. These agreements make the construction a top-notch project because they're the best folks to do it. Their projects are on time, on task, and on budget. Back in February, I signed an executive order to make sure large federal construction projects use project labor agreements. And it means that Micron is using one here as well. Micron's also paying a prevailing wage for funding apprenticeships programs, so folks can get trained in places like this community college for one of the thousands of good-paying jobs in this new site. And it really matters. It matters a lot. America invested in these chips. The federal investment helped reduce their costs, creating a market and an entire industry that's American-led. You know, that's how it all started. As a result, over 30 years ago, America had more than 30% of the global chip production. 30%. Then something happened. American manufacturing, the backbone of our economy, got hollowed out. Companies moved jobs overseas from the industrial Midwest as well as from the Northeast and manufacturing towns like here in central New York and upstate New York. And as a result, today we're down to producing only about 10% of the world's chips. We invented them, but we produce only 10%, despite leading the world in research and design of new chip technology as well. It's here in the United States. But because of the new law I signed and Chuck designed and delivered, we're turning things way around in a very big way. With Micron's $100 billion investment alone, we're going to increase America's share of global memory chips and production by 500%. The company Intel in Ohio and other companies, including foreign companies, that are investing billions of dollars across America to make these chips here. And it matters to you all, no matter where you live. It matters a great deal. Making these chips in America is going to help lower the cost for families looking to buy a car, to replace your washing machine, get a new cell phone. It also helps companies outcompete the rest of the world. And I've heard from Xi Jinping that he's a little concerned about that. No, I'm not joking. It's not, as I told him, it's not about conflict, it's about competition. And we're back in the game. We're competing again in a big way. Think about it this way. IBM needs these chips to build the fastest quantum computers ever built in the world in Poughkeepsie, New York. Instead of relying on chips made overseas that could be delayed because of a pandemic or some other global supply chain issue, they can get their chips in a few hours. In a few hours. It's a game changer. You know, where is it written? Where is it written that the United States of America can't be the manufacturing capital of the world? Think about this. No, I mean it sincerely. Where in the hell is it written that says we cannot be, as we've been hearing for the last 25 years, the manufacturing capital of the world? This country lost over 180,000 manufacturing jobs under the last guy that had this job. We've created 700,000 manufacturing jobs on my watch, adding manufacturing jobs at a faster rate than in 40 years. The previous president made a string of broken promises in places like Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, where promised investments in jobs and manufacturing never materialized, but layoffs and shuttered factories did materialize. On my watch, we've kept our commitments. On my watch, Made in America isn't just a slogan, it's a reality. Made in America. And today's announcement is the latest example of my economic plan at work. I've said from the beginning that my objective is to build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out. An economy that rewards work, not just wealth. An economy that works for everyone. So the poor have a ladder up, the middle class can do better, and when that happens, the wealthy do very well. They don't get hurt at all. They do very well. It's a fundamental shift, and it's working compared to what the very conservative Republicans are offering these days. Let's just take a look at the facts. When I took office, the economy was in ruins. My predecessor was the first president since Herbert Hoover, not a joke, to lose jobs in the entirety of his administration, the first. Unemployment, when I was sworn in, was at 6.4%. Hundreds of thousands of small businesses closed. The irony is that during the pandemic, the record number of Americans became, at the same time we lost all these small companies, a record number of Americans became billionaires in the middle of this crisis. While more than 9 million people were still out of work from the pandemic when I took office. Today, with the help of the people behind me, we're in a much better place. 10 million jobs created since we took office, a record for any administration in American history. Unemployment is at 3.5%, the lowest it's been in 50 years. 5.4 million Americans applied to start small businesses, the highest level ever in American history. And because of the action we've taken, gas prices are declining. We're down $1.25 since the peak at this summer, and they've been falling for the last 3 weeks as well, and adding up real savings for families. Today, the most common price of gas in America is $3.39, down from over $5 when I took office. We need to keep making that progress by having energy companies bring down the cost of a gallon of gas. That reflects the cost they're paying for a barrel of oil. There used to be a direct correlation. Barrel of oil goes down, the price at the pump goes down at the same time. If we're taking average profits they've been making over the last 20 years instead of the historic profits they're making today, the price of gas would be down an additional 40% to 40 cents today to $3 a gallon. And by the way, last quarter, the 5 largest oil companies made, in the last quarter, $70 billion in profit in 90 days. Shell announced just this morning that it made $9.5 billion in profits in the third quarter. $9.5 billion. That's more than twice of what they made in the third quarter of last year. And they raised their dividends as well, so the profits are going back to their shareholders instead of going to the pump and lower the prices. Because if they charge the same amount as they're acting as they did a year ago and 2 years ago, when the price of gas goes down, the price of oil goes down, the price of gas goes down. And even though my Republican friends in Congress seem to be hoping for a recession, many of them, present company excluded, today the GDP results came out, and the economy, in fact, is growing. In fact, the economy grew at 2.6% rate last quarter, and although it may not feel like it for everyone, people's incomes went up last quarter more than inflation went up. And enough growth. So economic growth is up, the price of inflation is down, real incomes are up, and the price of gas is down. Folks, continue to spend, but now at a more stable pace than during our rapid recovery last year. Businesses continue to invest in America. Exports are up, which means we're making things here in America and shipping the products overseas instead of shipping jobs overseas and sending them back here. The supply chains are running more smoothly, helping companies build up inventories. Here's another thing. My predecessor promised, and you heard it for 4 years, Infrastructure Week, seemingly every week for 4 years. But it never got done. It became a punchline when you talk about Infrastructure Week. Well, on my watch, we turned Infrastructure Week into the decade of infrastructure and a headline. A once-in-a-generation investment on our nation's roads, highways, bridges, railroads, ports, airports, water systems, high-speed internet. And the American people are seeing the benefits of this economy that works for them. Families have more net worth today than they did before the pandemic. Fewer families are behind in their mortgages, their credit card bills, than they were before the pandemic. More Americans have health insurance than before the pandemic. And we're doing everything we can to give folks just a little bit, and my dad would say, just a little bit of breathing room. We're giving Medicare the power to negotiate lower drug prices. Folks, we've been trying this for as long as I was in the Congress. We pay the highest price for prescription drugs of anywhere in the world. And I'm talking the exact same prescription made by the exact same drug company, sold in the United States and sold in France. You can buy it probably 30% cheaper in France or Canada, around the world. Where's it written that that's okay? Where does it say that's okay to do? We're capping seniors' out-of-pocket prescriptions starting next year. Prescription drugs, and it's the law now, will not have to pay if they're on Medicare more than $2,000 a year for the prescriptions, no matter how much they cost. Even if their drug costs are $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 a year, like some cancer drugs do cost. Now, if Big Pharma tries to raise drug prices faster than inflation, they're going to have to write a check to Medicare to cover the difference, because there's no rationale for it. Unless they can prove they engage in additional research to improve the product, if it's the same exact product, they cannot raise the price beyond the cost of inflation for that particular drug. And by the way, put this in perspective, last year the price of 1,200 specific prescription drugs went up faster than inflation. We're going to put a stop to that. From now on, if drug companies rise the price faster than inflation, they're going to have to rebate the money back to Medicare. We're also capping the cost of insulin for seniors on Medicare at $35 per prescription instead of the average $400 a month, like some are paying now. We passed tax credits to help families buy energy-efficient appliances, put solar panels on their homes, help them buy an electric vehicle, weatherize their home. Things that are going to save, it's estimated by the utility companies, an average of $500 a year for the families, and much more if they were to purchase a vehicle. Yesterday, we announced steps my administration is taking to get rid of unfair hidden fees, known as junk fees, that are proliferating, like surprise banking overdraft fees, an average of $35 for every overdraft, or credit card late fees, an average of $50. Or if you get on a plane and you want your 2-year-old child to sit next to you, you're going to find out you paid a hell of a lot more for your ticket when you land, before you land. If you find yourself in a position, and it goes on and on and on, all these hidden fees, well, guess what? these can add up and make taking the real money out of the pockets of ordinary Americans. That's on top of actions we took earlier this month to lower the cost of hearing aids, to make them available over the counter at places like Walgreens and Walmart. This is going to save, on average, $3,000 for a pair of hearing aids for millions of Americans with hearing loss. $3,000. I took action to ease the burden of student debt for millions of working and middle-class families. Average income, $70,000 a family, recovering from the pandemic. My friends on the right, they criticize the move. But I'm never going to apologize for helping working and middle-class families as they recover from the pandemic. Especially not to those same folks who voted for a $2 trillion tax cut before I got in office to give away that mainly benefited wealthy Americans and the biggest corporations. Not a penny of it paid for. And we're doing all this by reducing the deficit at the same time. I don't want to hear about big spending Democrats creating the deficit. Let me give you the facts. The very deficit reduction that the Republicans voted against when they opposed the Inflation Reduction Act. This year, the deficit under our leadership is falling by $1.4 trillion. Let me say it again. This year alone, the deficit is down $1.4 trillion. In my first year in office, the deficit fell one year by $350 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, the largest ever one-year cut in American history on the deficit, cut the deficit in half. As I said, this follows a historic drop of $350 billion last year. And we're going to reduce the deficit by another $250 billion over the next decade. Why? A big part of that is because corporations are finally going to have to pay something. 15% minimum tax. You know, in the year 2000, 55 corporations made $40 billion. God love them, as my mother would say. But they paid zero in federal tax. Zero in federal tax. So guess what? The Inflation Reduction Act, we made sure they have to pay a minimum of 15%. That's less than you guys pay as union members in your tax. That's less than school teachers, firefighters, cops pay. But that 15% increase in the minimum tax is going to make sure we're in good shape for a long time here. That's all in stark contrast to Kevin McCarthy, Republican leader of the House of Representatives, and his fellow MAGA Republicans who say their number one priority is to do the following. And they've said it publicly. By the way, if I had asked you, and we were just walking down the street, so can you tell me what the Republican platform is? What they're for? I'm not joking. I'm being deadly earnest. Like I said, I've been around a long time in public life. Republicans usually always have platforms. Say, this is what we're for. Well, they can't tell you what they're for, but they'll make sure they'll tell you what they're against. They're going to give the power we just gave to Medicare to lower drug prices back to Big Pharma to raise prices instead. The cap on the $2,000 cap on prescription drugs for seniors, gone, if Kevin has his way, McCarthy. $35 a month cap on insulin for diabetes for seniors, gone. Savings on health care premiums, $800 a year for literally millions of Americans under the Affordable Care Act, gone. And of course, they're still determined to repeal the Affordable Care Act overall, which would mean that tens of millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions who can't otherwise get insurance will lose even that insurance. Existing condition. Are gone as well if Kevin gets his way in the Republican Congress. Tax credits to lower energy bills, gone. Corporate minimum tax, gone. Under the Republican plan, some big corporations are going to go back to paying zero again. That's the plan. I would argue it's responsible and will make inflation worse if they succeed. And then they're coming after Social Security. Now, it sounds like, there's Biden, that's typical Democrats saying Republicans are after Social Security. This is the one thing they've set out. They've written it down on pieces of paper. Senator Rick Scott, the Republican from Florida, who's in charge of getting Republicans elected to the Senate, has a plan that's laid out. You can look it up. You can, as my used to say, you can Google it. The plan that Congress will give Congress a chance to cut Social Security, Medicare every 5 years. Every 5 years it's going to be up on the ballot. Either gets voted on or gets lost. Every 5 years. It's no longer, there's no such thing as a permanent plan. Every 5 years, you've been paying your Social Security since you were 16 years old in your first paycheck. Senator Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, he thinks that's taken too long. He wants it done every year. Every year, Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block, every single year. And now they put forward a real ticking time bomb for the country. You're going to hear a lot more about it. Republican leadership in the Congress has said, they made it clear, that if they don't get their way, if I don't vote to shut down, if I don't vote to reduce Social Security and Medicare, if I don't support that, they're going to shut down the government. Refuse to pay America's bills for the first time in American history, to put America in default. Again, read this. That's what they're saying. Unless we yield to the demands to cut Social Security and Medicare, they're determined to cut Social Security and Medicare, and they're willing to take down the economy over it. There is nothing that would create more chaos or do more damage to the American economy than that happening, if it were to happen. Let me close with this. It's been a rough few years for a lot of people I grew up with, hardworking Americans. For a lot of families, things are still tough. But there's some bright spots out there where America is reasserting itself. I've asked CEOs, including Micron and CEOs of many other countries, the following question. When I spoke to the Business Roundtable, spoke to the Chamber of Commerce, National Chamber of Commerce. When the United States government decides to invest considerable resources in a new industry that we need to build up for our national security and economic well-being, does that encourage or discourage companies from getting in the game? The overwhelming answer is it encourages them to get in the game. Federal investment attracts private sector investment, particularly in those things we need badly. Our national security depends on us having access to the most modern computer chips in the world. It depends on it. One of the things I've been able to do, and I make no bones about it, because of Russia's activities, we have curtailed their ability to access some of this stuff. And guess what? They're not able to rebuild those devastating weapon systems to take out those civilians in Ukraine as well. Not a joke. It makes a big difference. These things matter. They matter a great deal. And it creates jobs and it creates industries. It demonstrates we're all in this together. And that's what today's all about. I've never, and I mean this sincerely, I've never been more optimistic in my life about America's future. I mean it sincerely. Not because I'm president, but because we have entrepreneurs and people who know what they're doing to lead us to in a completely different era in terms of the kinds of technologies we need, like this man right here. Because I look out at that younger generation. It's the best educated generation, the least prejudiced, the most engaged, and the most least self-serving generation in American history. Look, I hope you feel what I feel standing here today. Pride. Pride in what we can do when we do it together to build a better America. Proving it to everyone, proving to the world that our best days are ahead of us. I know every major world leader because of the nature of my job, and before that, when I was vice president, that was my job, and before that, I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And guess what? There's not a single nation in the world, of major nation, that wouldn't trade places with the President of the United States in a heartbeat. Not a joke. Think about it. Not a single solitary one. Not a single one. And I talk to these folks all the time and meet with them all the time. And they want to know, are we going to be okay? Because if we're doing well, they think they got a shot to do well too. And that's not hyperbole. That's a fact. But we just have to keep it going. And I know we can. We just have to remember, for God's sake, who we are. We are the United States of America. There is nothing beyond our capacity. And we're the only nation in the world that has come out of every crisis better than when we went into the crisis. And folks, we're going to do it again. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. And I want to invite my good friend, the great partner, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, to the podium, author of the CHIPS and Science Act, and one of the major reasons we're standing here. Chuck, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Great job. That was well done. Everyone was giving a standing ovation.
Well, what a great speech. Does that show what the America we stand for is? Absolutely. Thank you, President Biden. And it's my distinct honor to welcome you back home to Syracuse. Your history in Q
on Chuck Schumer's speeches, as well as the following speeches on our telecast at 6 o'clock for News Live at 6. So, Ericka, let's talk about Biden's speech about Micron. The Micron impact to this community will sure be massive.
Yes, you know, he mentioned so much about jobs, about everything that is going to, like we said earlier, trickle down to the community. But his biggest thing, besides the jobs that are helping the community, is that it's increasing shares by over 500% on the national and international market. And this is a big deal considering so many of the plants are already in Asia. This is great for the country and the economy.
Right, and this is definitely a major impact, just not only for the international and national markets, the markets here in Onondaga County. Let's talk about the Micron deal and how it will impact the local area. $100 billion will be invested over a 20-year period. And according to Biden, those chips that they insert from Micron are for cars, they're for laundry units, they're for your dishwashers at home. It has a major impact on how people operate on their every day-to-day lives. And not only will it just impact people on a national level, here the economy. There will be 9,000 direct jobs going towards Micron and just the community here. There'll be 9,000 more jobs here in Onondaga County. And the average salary for these jobs, according to Biden, $100,000.
And it's such a big number to look at, especially since the changes as we have this plant coming into the area. Shawnee Davis, as we saw, you know, she spoke on behalf of the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, being the first black master electrician. She very much cares about what this is going to look like for the community and how this is going to impact the kids in the area so they can stay in the area.
Right, it's definitely going to not only impact Syracuse and Clay, New York, Onondaga County in general. Biden did talk about his legislative agenda. He talks about how he got his project labor agreement passed in Congress just this past February. That kind of set up the door for Micron to come to Clay.
Yes, and you know, as like they talked about reaching across the aisle and talking and having these conversations at a national level so that it can come down and impact communities like this, you know, they're prioritizing underrepresented communities, and like you said earlier, that you have people from both sides of the aisle participating in this conversation, figuring out ways that it's going to help everyone. He called out John Katko. He said he's his friend. He's happy that he's here. He likes him a lot. They worked together when President Biden was still working on Capitol Hill. That is such a big part of what this means to move the country forward. Right.
He talks about the bipartisanship. Joe Biden has been in government for 60 years now, or less than that. But Biden kind of talks about how it takes just in general, it takes both aisles of the sides to kind of come together and put together legislation. Like you just mentioned, John Katko was mentioned in the speech, but behind him was Governor Kathy Hochul, Senators Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, but there was no Kathy Hochul endorsement.
Yes, and you know, we're going to see what happens as this continues to happen, get closer to more and more to the midterms. But he did say towards the end of his speech that we are all in this together. And he's the most optimistic he's ever been for the country, and that speaks very much in his recent actions.
And before we wrap up our program, I do want to notice that President Biden talked about how he was calling out former President Donald Trump and the Republicans. We talked about in our preview show that Biden would call out Republicans in hopes to kind of get the Democrats to get some votes in the midterm just 12 days from now.
Yes, and he called out Donald Trump, but he didn't call out the GOP as a whole. And as we're seeing, that's a great tactic for him to use because he's keeping his relationships like with Catco without diminishing the entire GOP.
Right, and Biden did point out that with Trump, there was low employment rates, and during the pandemic, that businesses were having to close because there was not enough funding for them to stay open. But this is definitely a preview for the election coming up just 12 days from now.
Yes, it is. I'm really excited about it, too.
And just one other thing before we know, our election special is coming up on CitrusTV. That will air live on OTN as well as CitrusTV News on November 8th. That's a Tuesday at 10 p.m. You've been watching our live CitrusTV News coverage of President Biden's visit to Syracuse.
We will have full coverage of CitrusTV News live at 6 with our John Perik live from SRC Arena and Jake Morrell at Hancock Airport.
You can follow us on Twitter at CitrusTV News. And now I'm Benjamin Schiller, and that is Ericka. Have a good afternoon, Syracuse.